The grand courtroom hummed with quiet tension as Karoline Leavitt walked confidently through its heavy wooden doors. Her sharp navy blue suit was perfectly pressed, her golden cross necklace resting gently against her collarbone. She was young, but her reputation preceded her, a legal prodigy, a fighter for justice. Today, she wasn't just defending a client, she was defending a principle. The audience, a mix of reporters, legal scholars, and everyday citizens, whispered among themselves. This wasn't just any trial, it was a high-profile case with national attention. At the front of the room sat Judge Malcolm Harrington, an older man with sharp, calculating eyes. He was known for his strict demeanor and controversial rulings. He tapped his gavel, calling for silence. Karoline stepped to the defense table, ready to speak. But before she could say a single word, Judge Harrington's voice boomed through the courtroom. "Ms. Leavitt, before we proceed, there is an issue we must address." A murmur rippled through the room. Karoline raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "What issue, Your Honor?" she asked, her voice even. The judge leaned forward, his gaze landing squarely on her chest. "That cross," he said coldly. "You'll need to remove it before we continue." A stunned silence fell over the room. Karoline's fingers instinctively touched the delicate cross. She had worn it every day since law school. Her expression remained calm, but inside, a fire ignited. Would she obey, or would she fight? A tense silence gripped the courtroom. All eyes were on Karoline. She let her fingers rest on the cross for a moment, then dropped her hand, her expression unwavering. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but controlled, "this necklace is a personal symbol of my faith. I fail to see how it interferes with these proceedings." Judge Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of his bench. "Courtroom decorum requires neutrality," he snapped. "Religious symbols can be distracting." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several reporters scribbled notes, sensing a headline-worthy moment. Karoline did not flinch. "Are you suggesting," she countered, "that my faith makes me incapable of practicing law fairly?" The judge's nostrils flared. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a young attorney. "I'm suggesting," he said sharply, "that I will hold you in contempt if you refuse to comply." Gasps echoed through the room. A few spectators exchanged shocked glances. Was the judge really about to fine, or even jail, a decorated attorney over a necklace? Karoline's jaw tightened, but she remained poised. "Very well, Your Honor." For a moment, it seemed like she would comply. She reached for the clasp at the back of her neck, but instead of removing the cross, she slowly let her hands drop. "I'll keep it on," she said. "And if that's a problem, then you'll have to explain to the world why you're punishing an attorney for exercising her First Amendment rights." A hushed shockwave spread through the courtroom. The judge's face turned red. Would he back down? Or double down? Judge Harrington's fingers drummed against his bench, his frustration barely concealed. He was trapped. Karoline had just backed him into a legal corner, and he knew it. But his ego refused to let her win. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "if you insist on disregarding courtroom rules, then you leave me no choice." He grabbed his gavel and slammed it down hard. "You are hereby fined $5,000 for contempt of court." Gasps filled the room. Karoline didn't even blink. Instead, she smiled. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said smoothly. "Now, would you care to explain on record what legal precedent justifies that fine?" The judge hesitated. She had him. One of the journalists in the back raised an eyebrow. A few others leaned in, ready to jot down the judge's response. For the first time, he looked uncertain. But instead of answering her question, he tried to change the subject. "Enough stalling," he barked. "Proceed with your case, or I'll hold you in further contempt." Karoline knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to make her look like the troublemaker. But she wasn't going to let that happen. She casually pulled out a thin stack of papers from her briefcase and walked towards the bailiff. "I'd like this fine to be recorded as an official court document," she said, handing it over. The judge's jaw tensed. He knew what this meant. This was now public record. Any higher court or the media could now scrutinize his ruling. He had played his hand too soon. The audience was whispering now. Even the defense attorney on the other side of the room looked mildly intrigued. Then Karoline turned back to the judge, her tone calm but firm. "Now let's talk about the actual case." Judge Harrington had no choice but to proceed, But Karoline could tell. This battle was far from over. Judge Harrington adjusted his glasses, trying to mask his discomfort. He had expected Karoline to back down, to be rattled by his fine, but she was calm, confident, and completely in control. She approached the jury box, her voice smooth but authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "what just happened in this courtroom is more than a simple fine." The jurors leaned in. "You just witnessed a judge penalizing an attorney, not for misconduct, not for disrupting proceedings, but for wearing a cross." More murmurs from the audience. Even the defense attorney, who had been silent up until now, shifted uncomfortably. Karoline turned back to Judge Harrington, her gaze piercing. "Your Honor, under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, freedom of religion is protected, both inside and outside this courtroom. If you are fining me for wearing a cross, then you are violating federal law." The judge stiffened. His fingers tightened around his gavel. She continued before he could interrupt. "I'm filing a motion to dismiss the fine and requesting an official review of your ruling by the Judicial Ethics Committee." Now, the entire courtroom erupted in gasps. The judge's face went pale. Karoline wasn't just standing her ground. She was putting his career on the line. He banged his gavel. "Enough," he snapped. "Proceed with the case, Ms. Leavitt, or I will." Karoline smiled again. "You will what, Your Honor?" she asked smoothly. "Fine me again. Hold me in contempt for quoting the Constitution." Silence. The judge's lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but he had no legal ground to stand on. The bailiff coughed to break the awkward tension. Then, without another word, the judge picked up his pen and scribbled something on his notepad. Finally, he muttered, "Fine revoked." But Karoline wasn't done yet. She was just getting started. She turned to the jury again, taking full advantage of the moment. "Now, let's focus on why we're really here today." Judge Harrington had tried to silence her, but instead, he had just made her more powerful than ever. Judge Harrington shifted in his chair, his grip tightening on his gavel. The fine had been revoked, but it was clear that Karoline wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. She took a deep breath, then turned back to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just witnessed an attempt to silence me. But I won't be silenced." She walked toward the defense table, then gestured toward the judge. And this isn't the first time Judge Harrington has used his power unfairly. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. The judge's face darkened. "Ms. Leavitt, you are walking a fine line." Karoline didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I've done my research." She pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the plaintiff's table. "This is a collection of past rulings where you have exhibited clear bias against people of faith." Now the gasps were louder. The jury members exchanged glances. Reporters in the back started scribbling notes. The judge's jaw tightened. "You have no right." Karoline raised a single hand. "Actually, I do. This is public record." She opened the folder, pulling out case after case where Judge Harrington had fined, penalized, or dismissed individuals based on their religious beliefs. "Let's start with case hashtag 2019-572, she said, holding up a document. "You ruled against a teacher who was fired for wearing a cross. She sued for religious discrimination. You dismissed her case without even hearing arguments." The judge's fingers twitched. Karoline lifted another document. "Here's another. A police officer asked for Sundays off to observe his faith. You ruled that his request was burdensome to the department and denied him accommodations. He lost his job." She flipped through more pages. "Time and time again, Your Honor, you have used your position to silence those who dare to express their faith." The judge slammed his gavel. "That's enough," he roared. Karoline didn't even blink. "Is it?" she asked coolly. "Or are you afraid of what happens when people start paying attention?" The tension in the room was suffocating. The jury was no longer just listening to Karoline's case. They were judging the judge himself. Then the unexpected happened. A man in a crisp suit stood up in the back row. He was from the Judicial Conduct Review Board. "Your Honor," he said in a calm yet firm tone, "we need to speak." In private, Judge Harrington froze. For the first time all day, he looked afraid. And Karoline knew, without a doubt, she had just won. Judge Harrington stiffened in his chair, his once commanding presence now diminished. The man from the Judicial Conduct Review Board, JCRB, approached the bench, his gaze unyielding. "Your Honor, please step into chambers." We have urgent matters to discuss. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence. Reporters scribbled furiously. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. This court is in session, the judge barked, his voice cracking slightly. I will not be interrupted by baseless accusations. But the JCRB official didn't back down. Actually, Your Honor, this is about more than today's case. We've received multiple complaints about your pattern of bias. Karoline folded her arms, watching the scene unfold. She had anticipated resistance, but not this level of scrutiny from an official agency. You are officially under review, the official continued. And if you refuse to comply, we can escalate this to the state Supreme Court. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Harrington's face paled. With a clenched jaw, he slammed his gavel down one last time. Court is in recess, he muttered through gritted teeth before storming off toward his chambers. The moment the doors slammed shut, Karoline felt the weight of the moment settle. She had done what few could. She had held a corrupt judge accountable. Behind closed doors, Judge Harrington paced, his face flushed with anger. The JCRB official calmly took a seat across from him, placing a thick folder on the table. We have documentation proving a repeated pattern of discrimination, he said. And it's not just about religious bias. There are reports of intimidation, unethical rulings, and potential conflicts of interest. The judge's hands trembled. I have done nothing wrong. The official raised an eyebrow and slid a paper across the desk. Then how do you explain this? Harrington's eyes widened. It was a financial record linking him to a high-profile legal firm, one that had won suspiciously high rates of cases in his courtroom. He had been caught. You have two choices, the official continued. Resign quietly or face a formal judicial misconduct hearing. If that happens, you could lose everything, including your pension. Harrington swallowed hard. For the first time in his career, he felt powerless. The doors to the judge's chambers burst open. Judge Harrington stepped out, his face a mask of frustration. He marched to the bench but didn't sit. Instead, he gripped the edge tightly. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, he spoke. I am recusing myself from this case. His voice was strained. Effective immediately. Yes. Whispers. Stunned silence. Karoline kept her expression steady, but inside, she felt a surge of victory. Furthermore, he continued, his words slow and reluctant. I will be stepping down from my position as judge, effective at the end of the month. Reporters leaped from their seats, snapping photos and scribbling headlines. It was over. Karoline had not only defended herself, she had exposed corruption at the highest level. As she gathered her papers, she heard a voice behind her. Ms. Leavitt. She turned to see a gray-haired woman in the jury box. Thank you. A wave of applause broke out, starting small but growing louder. Karoline smiled, nodding in acknowledgement. She had come to defend her right to wear a simple cross. Instead, she had taken down a corrupt judge. And the world was watching.